Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Pink and Channels. We're here to preview Norwich City's Friday night clash at the MKM Stadium. Of course, the trip to Hull City in the Championship after the sort of brief respite we had in the FA Cup last weekend didn't quite go to plan in terms of a result, and a trip to Bristol midweek next week, which I'm sure me and Sam are both looking forward to. Sam, I mean, how are you and how are you feeling, I suppose, around Norwich City at the moment?
Yeah, I'm good. It feels like I've had an absolutely massive break, to be honest, from football, given how quickly the games were coming before this one. But, it's obviously not even been a full week as we might normally have for a championship game. It's only been, 5 days now since Bristol Rovers, but it feels like it's been forever. And I'm looking forward to watching a game again. Unfortunately, I feel like I'm going to be watching Norwich in quite a lot of rearguard action, as I'm sure we'll get on to, against a pretty good team, and probably going in as underdogs, as well as the long trip to Hull and the overnight stay. So not loads of elements I love, but overall, I'm a football fan. I like watching football games, so I'm looking forward to getting back to it. How about you? Are you excited to get back to the Championship after the FA Cup, or maybe even less so after that Bristol Rovers game?
Yeah, I was kind of going to bring on the performance last week and the disappointment. Just one win in the last 6 for the Canaries now, after what was a good run of 1 defeat in 8 prior to that, which maybe felt like kind of the upturn. We're kind of now back to where we almost were, but prior to that run there before Christmas. How important do you feel it is now, Sam, for David Wagner that we get a good performance tomorrow night, a good result? Because it feels like maybe in the past week the kind of shift again has happened and maybe there's pressure on him again.
Yeah, I think for his own reputation and the way that he's seen amongst the fan base, it's absolutely vital. And I don't think one good performance or one good result at this stage is going to win plenty of people back. It feels like it's gone to a certain level where he probably needs 4 or 5 good performances and good results in a row to get back into the good books. But as far as sort of his career and the safety of his job, I keep talking about the fact that it's actually just really difficult to predict, because at any other club, you would have said probably 3 or 4 times now throughout David Wagner's tenure, you could have quite comfortably gone into games saying if he loses this one, it feels very likely that he goes. But because of the number of times we should have been able to say that, and maybe Wagner should have been in a more compromising position than he has been, it's hard at any point to say, yeah, he's under pressure. If they don't win this game, it'll mean this for him, because ultimately we don't know what Ben Napper's thinking. It feels very much like a period of flux for the football club, and it's quite difficult to predict, therefore, what they're thinking going into it. So as much as I'm sure Norwich fans would love to hear us say they have to get a result, and the feeling from above him won't be favourable towards him if they don't get a result, it's quite hard for us to say that because of the number of times they've been in this position. But equally, because of those standards at any other football club, you can't say that the pressure isn't absolutely on him. And I think you could tell at his press conference yesterday that he was feeling the pressure. The tone of the questions has started to shift back towards him after that sort of decent period has worn off, and I think he is feeling the pressure just from how he was and his demeanour at that press conference. So yeah, definitely in the context of football at large, he should be under enormous pressure, and he is going into this game. And with fans, that's absolutely the case. But because of the reasons I've spoken about, it's quite hard to predict where his future actually lies and what it could actually mean for him.
Yeah, you bring up that press conference. That was kind of going to be my next line of thought. Yesterday was quite an interesting one. I felt his kind of body language, his character was maybe not what we've seen in recent weeks, even during the kind of moments where he's really under pressure, post Sunderland, post Blackburn, some of the other games kind of in that period. I felt like he was still very honest, very open, quite calm and collected, like we've kind of seen throughout his whole sort of year now in charge. And it felt almost yesterday a little bit more Dean Smith end of kind of managerial career at Norwich City, like, in that he kind of became a little bit more snappy, kind of batted back questions that Connor was asking. What did you make of that? Did that stink of a man that was maybe under pressure?
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised by it because, as you said, he's got a reputation now for being a nice person, somebody who's easy to deal with. And even when fans criticise him heavily and say that it's time to go, quite often it's caveated with, great guy and they like him. And, whenever I've had to ask him questions, I've, even when they've been difficult questions, I found him pretty comfortable to deal with. He's quite open and honest with his answers, quite consistent and quite thoughtful. But as you said, there were a lot of very short answers. There were some questions he basically didn't answer. I think Connor asked a question about sort of his streaky runs, and he basically said, I don't want to look back, I want to look forward. And then there was a question about Fabio Carvalho as well. It was basically his response was just, yeah, good player. So it wasn't, I did find it a little bit out of character, and you do wonder what's changed there, whether he was just irritated by the tone of the questions, but equally they're questions that he will have known going into it he was going to have to answer. He knows the feeling around him at the moment, and he must know that he's under pressure because he's been fired from jobs before. He's been in this position before, not only at Norwich but at other clubs where it's not ended as well for him as it has maybe when he's been under pressure at Norwich. So to be honest, even if he was feeling the pressure, I would have been a little bit surprised. But, like you suggest, I think it is probably to that tune a little bit. I think he has started to go on the defensive a tad, and you're right to compare it to those sort of Dean Smith end of his tenure press conferences. I think if people watched that whole press conference and then went back and watched a couple from Dean Smith towards the end, they would probably find a lot of similarities. So yeah, I think it is somebody who knows he's under pressure, but equally I'm still a little bit confused as to where that press conference has come from, because that's not the sort of character we've come to expect from him.
Yeah, quite a few lines though around Josh Sargent's return and kind of the build up to fitness we've been seeing in recent weeks. That the plan was always to play 45 minutes against Bristol Rovers, and thought he actually had a really good game prior to, of course, coming off and maybe sort of decline in terms of Norwich's sort of creative output. Maybe didn't look quite the same in the second half, apart from those couple of chances that maybe Adam Eder had. Do you expect them to start tomorrow night, Sam? I know you've recorded your tactics board, so people can head over there and hear your sort of full 11. But what sort of impact do you think he could have, not for Norwich City and David Wagner, moving forwards into what's quite a sort of crucial period now in the season?
Yeah, I think he probably will start. And although Wagner does tend to sort of err on the side of caution when a player's coming back from a long-term injury, I was actually thinking about Ashley Barnes when he came back from, I think it was 2 months out, and he played in that QPR game. I think he actually played the whole game, despite the fact that he's obviously in his mid-30s, had come off a fairly serious injury, albeit not as serious as Sargent's. And based on that evidence, it's hard to rule Sargent out of playing the full 90 minutes, to be honest. But I think if Wagner feels he can play any more than 45, which the fact that he came through Bristol Rovers looking so good and then trained all week suggests he could, then I don't see why you wouldn't start him. Because even if he can only play 45, you're not going to want to start Adam Eder, for example, and then haul him off at half time. So I would very much expect to see Sargent start in this game. I expect to see him up front with Ashley Barnes, and I think there are actually really encouraging signs from Barnes in that Bristol Rovers game, although I know it was against League One opposition, and we have to sort of caveat it with that. It was FA Cup, where there's probably, when you're at a club like Norwich, a little bit less pressure than there is in the Championship. But I actually thought that was Barnes' best performance since Sargent's been out injured. So to see the fact that he could bring the best out of Barnes as well was really encouraging. That's probably another impact he can have, but also just the quality that he has at Championship level. And maybe he gets a little bit exposed in the Premier League, but where he's got a little bit more room to move into, he's got probably more time on the ball as well. He just looks a cut above Championship and EFL opposition, to be honest. He looks like an absolute athlete. And me and you have spoken before off camera about the fact that Norwich got obsessed with that athleticism over sort of a period of a couple of years. They tried to sign a lot of players that would bring a level of physicality, and in a lot of cases they failed to do that. But I think Sargent is evidence of the fact that they felt they needed to improve that area of the game, and when he plays, you can tell that that's what he brings. He really drives the team forward, and although I don't think individual brilliance is ever a sustainable solution, he will certainly produce better performances than Norwich have been used to without him. And although he might not have enough to push them into the playoffs on his own. I think he'll certainly win points in games where they wouldn't have done so otherwise. So it's definitely a major, major positive for Norwich that he's back, and hopefully he can just carry that form from earlier in the season into the games ahead.
Yeah, lots of comments and questions starting to flood through. We'll get around to those very shortly. Just staying on the theme of kind of what David Wagner might play tomorrow night, Sam. I think the left-back battle has been something that's been sort of a common theme, I suppose, in recent weeks. Timmy Yanulis, of course, picking up that injury, and Sam McCallum coming in. Second half against Ipswich, pretty good performance on that particular sort of 45-minute spell. Done quite well when he came on against Huddersfield. Maybe struggled a bit at West Brom and Millwall as well. Thought Yanulis was pretty poor against Bristol Rovers last weekend. So how do you think, I suppose, how do you see that one playing out? Who do you think might be the man to get the left-back slot tomorrow night?
I agree with your assessment pretty much in terms of who has been playing better and who deserves it. In my opinion, Sam McCallum has earned a start. I don't think Yanulis, as he said, was especially good against Bristol Rovers. And I think McCallum's actually a little bit underrated. He has the legs to get up and down, and he is a bit more of an athlete, I think, than Yanulis, a bit more physically capable, very good in the air, actually. And although defensively, I don't think he's perfect, I think for Championship level, he's pretty decent at fullback. And what you tend to find at this level are sort of traditional fullbacks that maybe are a little bit older, a little more physical, and not as technically capable or inclined to go forward. And then you find those really attacking fullbacks who maybe can't defend, amazingly. But that's just where you are in the Championship, unfortunately. If there is a fullback good enough to attack really well and defend really well, they're not going to be playing for Norwich City. So I think, although it's fair to criticise him, I think he maybe comes in for a little bit too much criticism at times, and I think he is a little bit of an underrated player. But that being said, Yanulis has been absolutely clearly Wagner's first choice at left back this season, so much so that at times McCallum's not even been in the matchday squad. So although in my opinion McCallum has been playing the better of the two when they've had chances over the last couple of months, it's hard to really look at the way that Wagner's gone for the season so far and say that he'll actually leave Dimitris Yanulis on the bench. So in the interest of safety, and I don't think there ever really is such a thing when you're guessing David Wagner's predicted, when you're predicting his 11, I would go for Yanulis. But I think if McCallum was in there, nobody would really have the right to be surprised. And I think McCallum probably has the right to expect that he will be, to be honest, based on those performances. I've spoken quite a lot about some of the strange decisions that Wagner's made when he's picked those lineups, the players that he's been persistent with even when they've made errors. And I don't think it's a good message to send your players when people are outplaying others, and when they're coming in they're doing really well, and then you're just going back to your favoured players on a regular basis. So I don't think it would send an especially good message if Yanulis does end up starting tomorrow, but I can definitely see it happening the way that he's gone so far this season. I don't know if I'm alone in that. How about you? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think I'd actually be swaying towards McCallum as well. I think in recent weeks I've probably seen more from him. Not necessarily saying he's been consistently good for 90-minute periods in games, but I think there's been 45-minute spells, or certainly from what we've seen in sort of that sort of couple of months patch of sort of games, I feel like he's probably had the bigger impact when he's played. Of course, got the goal when he came off the bench against Huddersfield as well, which, I know is not sort of an exploit you need in terms of a defender, but just that aerial ability, I think, is a huge benefit, particularly going to a place like Hull, where I think Norwich will be under some sustained pressure at different points, and I think he could be a useful asset aerially to deal with that. And moving on to Hull, of course, they're currently 7th, 1 point outside the playoffs. It's been a pretty good season for them. I think they've had a little bit of a wobble in recent weeks, just 3 wins out of their last 9 games in all competitions, and maybe the mood there was maybe sort of, I suppose, dwindling a little bit, but they've now had that picked up by, of course, the arrival yesterday of Fabio Carvalho on loan from Liverpool. Of course, was at RB Leipzig, played in the Champions League this season, done really well at Fulham in the Championship a few years ago. A real star in the making. I think they've been hit with some pretty difficult injury crisis. They've had Philogene's out injured, Delap's out injured, Seri's off to AFCON, so they've got a few issues there to be dealing with. But what are your sort of thoughts and feelings, I suppose, around Hull so far this season, Sam?
I think they're a really good side. I think they were unlucky not to get a point, if not all 3, against Norwich in the the first game of the season, and I really, really like Liam Rosenior as a coach. I remember him, even when he was, I think, like a coach in the Brighton under-23 setup. I remember him sort of being a pundit and doing some media stuff and thinking he spoke really, really well, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him go really far. And then he seemed to be sort of the man behind Wayne Rooney's success at Derby and a key figure in that. Then he's obviously gone on to do a great job with Hull, who were absolutely looking like a really middling team. Probably they were the sort of club that Norwich are scared of becoming at this stage now, and he's managed to drag them up, not only sort of away from relegation trouble and any fears over that, but up and around the playoff mix, which I don't think, when Norwich were relegated in 2022, I don't think anybody would have thought that Hull would be competing for the playoffs and Norwich would struggle with that. I really enjoy watching them, and I think Rosenior actually spoke about the fact that he felt that was what was attracting a lot of clubs to send their players on loan. He felt that was what inspired Fabio Carvalho to go there. And although, you know, I have watched a bit of Carvalho, I haven't watched, you know, loads of him. Just the way that Rosenior talks about him, he better back it up now, because I've not ever seen a manager speak so glowingly about a new signing. So I think there will definitely be some fear in the Norwich ranks over him and over some of the other players that have been performing really well. I think Liam Delap scored against them earlier this season, didn't he? And Ozan Tufan has looked like a really good player as well. So yeah, although every week I end up, you know, whenever I'm on this show, I end up saying you never know in the Championship, and it's always difficult in the Championship, and sort of parroting those cliches, I actually genuinely think Hull are a good shout to end up in the playoffs at the end of the season. Obviously, with a win, they can get into that top six now. And I think Norwich do really go into this as underdogs, but there isn't really much momentum on either side. And as you say, the good feeling tends to be on, or looks like it's going to be on Hull's side now that they've got Carvalho, and there's a little bit more positivity in that sense. And I always think momentum and feeling around a club is really important at this level. So I think Hull go in. I don't think, you know, Wagner should go into it and play the way that he did against Southampton. I don't think it's that level of mismatch. I think it would be, if they managed to win, it would be a really impressive result, I think.
Yeah, the MKM not being a particularly happy hunting ground for Norwich, not won there since 2007, and I think Hull are pretty good at home, just 3 defeats from their 12 games there in the Championship this season. So definitely going to be a difficult test. We'll dip into a few of the comments before we sort of come into the January transfer window, which I think has been a little bit more of a theme as well in recent press conferences. Jeffman98, do you think there's a chance that David Wagner has been told by Napa he's not the man and we're just waiting on whoever he wants to become available / be finalised? Would that explain his lack of media thus far? I mean, we spoke about that a little bit on the recent Pinkham podcast, Sam, kind of the availability of who Ben Napa might have in mind, or is David Wagner the man for him? I think Connor was playing devil's advocate a little bit with Paddy on that one. Where do you stand on that? You know, do you think Ben Napa's got a man in mind, and maybe there's a plan moving forwards, and Wagner's just a sort of bridging gap between that?
I'm not sure about one man. I would be quite surprised, you know, and I've spoken about this before, but given the fact that Stuart Webber used to speak about the fact that they would have lists and lists of coaches that they were keeping their eyes on, I'm sure pretty much every sporting director in the country has a list of names, of multiple names of coaches that they might be interested in if they became available and if they ever needed a new coach. So especially given how badly things have been going at Norwich, I'd be surprised if Napa hadn't managed to work out one available potential option in his sort of 2 months or more than 2 months in the building. To be honest, I would be surprised about that. And to address the first part of the question, I think, although it's definitely possible that Napa's decided Wagner isn't the man, obviously we don't know about that, but I think if he has decided that, I don't think Wagner would have been informed. Number one, I think motivation-wise, that's probably not the best thing to tell a coach, and equally, it's just quite an awkward situation for everyone to work in, and I don't think that's a good work environment. So if Napa does know, then I think it's going to be very much internal. He might be the only person that knows, and if he's not, then I would certainly be surprised if Wagner does. But I could probably see that. I could see the fact that they want a stopgap to the end of the season more than I could see them waiting for somebody, because, as I said, really most sporting directors worth their salt will have multiple names that are available and that they could go for if they ever needed a new head coach.
Yeah, with that, we're going to sort of talk a little bit about the January transfer window. Joe saying, I have strongly to admit, feeling nervous about the game and the way Norwich have been playing. I think we need to go into the transfer market. Joe would like a new striker if possible, if someone got injured, and maybe a new midfielder. Sam, based on Wagner's comments yesterday at the press conference, it doesn't feel like a striker's kind of anywhere on the list, despite sending Yujo Wang back to Nottingham Forest this week. Midfielder, maybe, is that something or an area you feel maybe Norwich defensive midfielder particularly, they could do with? And do you think there's sort of, I suppose, a willingness from their side to try and bring somebody in?
Yeah, it's that debate again over whether Norwich will move for a player a lot of people feel they need, and I'm sure they can see a gaping hole, to be honest, in that sort of defensive midfield area when Wagner doesn't really tend to like to play with those sorts of players. Obviously, we've seen McLean and Sarah so far in those roles, and neither of them either has the skill set as a complete defensive midfielder or has tended to play that way tactically under Wagner. And equally, I feel like which of those are you going to drop? Is he going to drop Ashley Barnes from the sort of number 10 role and just go with a 3 in midfield? Or if he doesn't do that, is he really ever going to drop one of Gabriel Sarah and Kenny McLean, who could probably, along with Jonathan Rowe, could quite easily claim to be 2 of the best 3 players Norwich have had so far this season? So in terms of where it fits in, especially under Wagner, that seems to me to be the problem. But I think that's the area that everyone's talking about. I know Connor sort of tried to suggest that area to him a little bit yesterday, and he wasn't giving much away, but he definitely didn't rule it out. On the strikers, it's like you said, Wagner. Wagner feels that 3 is the number to go with. That's why they sent Wang back. But I think it's also worth noting, actually, I'm doing a piece on this at the moment, that you can only register 25 players over the age of 21, and Norwich had every spot filled going after the transfer window. So in order to bring in anyone over the age of 21, they needed to get rid of somebody. So I think that's probably played a bit of a role in the Huang issue there as well. If they wanted to bring in more than that, then they would need to start looking at the likes of Dan Barden, John McCracken, who isn't likely to go out on loan because he's injured, although I suppose you could rule him out of registration because of that. Pedro Lima, the sort of players around the edges that would then be a little bit in limbo. So I think part of that Huang decision was to open up that space, or that would at least make sense. But right now it doesn't feel like they're pressing towards loads and loads of business. In fact, it feels like Norwich fans would at this moment in time have to be pleased with probably two signings, and I think they went into it feeling quite optimistic about the numbers of players that could come in, or the change that could start happening, because we sort of heard those noises going into it. But we sit here now on the 11th, and Norwich don't really seem to be close to signing anyone yet. David Wagner wasn't giving anything away, so I'm not optimistic about Norwich doing loads of business, but there's no doubt in my mind they would like to do at least something, and hopefully they can do something to bolster that squad, either for the future and to get this Napa project going, because I've talked about how they need to do something to show that this plan is in action, or somebody who can at least boost them until the end of the season. Because if playoffs are still their target, you would say they obviously need something to take them up a level, because they're obviously nowhere near there at the moment.
Yeah, it's all about sending that signal, which we kind of spoke about a little bit in the last podcast. You know, when you're Ben Napa and you're arriving in the building in November, you only really have this potential choice of changing the head coach. You can't really do anything else to show you're in the building and making decisions. The transfer window is this kind of first chance to make that mark. So you'd have to hope and feel that maybe there's something bubbling under the surface, and Norwich will maybe make a move later on in the window. Sam, just before we get your score predictions and feeling on the game, Kenny McLean was nominated this morning for the Championship Player of the Month award. I know you're probably up there with his biggest fans. A player who, of course, has played a multitude of positions throughout his Norwich City career. He's played left back, I think, centre half, central midfield, you asked him a few questions, bowled a few questions at Wagner yesterday around him and kind of the fact he might have been maybe the most consistent and best performer in his side in the sort of year he's been in charge of the club. How important is he maybe moving forwards if Norwich are going to try and pick their form up and, a player who's a leader, I suppose, in the dressing room?
Yeah, I was mainly pleased about that nomination because it gave me the chance to write 650 words about how great he was, to be honest. But yeah, I think he's been one of those players that has gone from being underrated in good teams to being really appreciated when things aren't going especially well. I think if you look at the sort of player of the season winners when Norwich have been relegated or when the seasons haven't gone quite as well as they could have, and it's the likes of Johnny Howson, Tim Krul, there's a history of goalkeepers probably winning awards when teams haven't been doing especially well. And I think McLean actually fits into that bracket of now when Norwich maybe aren't doing the best and he has got functional players around him. Although he does fit probably into that all-rounder functional bracket, you can see that he's a level above the rest of the players around him that are sort of doing that role. Admittedly, if you look at a sort of Daniel Farke side and the excitement of Todd Cantwell when he was at his best, Emi Buendia, Tamer Pukki, even the likes of sort of Mario Vrancic and Marco Stiepermann, who were pretty exciting around the edges, to then have a functional sort of box-to-box all-rounder midfielder who maybe wasn't scoring the goals or getting the assists that other people were. I can understand why he wasn't getting as much recognition in those great teams, but I think, to be honest, he's been actually at a really high level throughout his career as a Norwich player, and maybe people are now just starting to catch up with the fact that he is a really important player and he has been really good. I've seen some bits on social media really suggesting that he's sort of a Wagnerite. He's benefited from the Germans' principles, and without speaking too badly about the head coach, I hope he doesn't just get, after such a great season, I hope he doesn't just get banded in as a sort of a representation of this Wagner team that probably isn't going to go down in Norwich City history as one of the greatest or one of the most loved teams that this football club has had, because I think regardless of Wagner's principles, he's done absolutely everything he could in this team, dragged them through as many games as possible. He's been an absolute servant to this football club, to be honest. And with his contract now, I think extending to 2026, it's probably fair to say that by the end of that, he's quite likely to be a club legend. And given how consistent he's been, not only for this season or last season, but for years and years, how consistent he's been, I think he deserves that recognition. And it's nice to see that coming now from a sort of in a national way with the EFL nomination rather than just pockets of the Norwich fan base. And I think he deserves that. I'm not feeling optimistic about his chances of winning with the likes of Steffi Mavrididi in there, but we'll see. And I'm glad that he's got a little bit of recognition, even if the team is struggling at the moment.
Yeah, that will be announced tomorrow morning. I think he's up against Sakamoto from Coventry, Begovic from QPR, and Mavrididi, as you referenced there, from Leicester. And with that, we're going to get your thoughts and feelings, Sam, moving into Friday night and a score prediction. I mean, Joe asking where Norwich could end up in the table. I think if they win, they go up to 8th, yet they could go, depending obviously the results then on Saturday. I think they could, I think goal difference makes it difficult, but they'd then potentially go level with Blackburn in 17th. So it's kind of, it's such a skewed league, and that Norwich could, that gap is so small between the teams kind of just outside the playoffs and the teams sort of further down the table. With that, Sam, thoughts and feelings and a score prediction.
Yeah, it's hard to be optimistic going away to a team that looks so good, that's definitely in the playoff race, and with the negative momentum that Norwich have at the moment. But equally, they've done quite well against sort of possession-based teams. In any sense, I can't see Norwich putting on a fantastic, fun show for their fans. I want to be optimistic and say that they can get a point out of this, but I think that might just be a bridge too far after getting points against Southampton and Ipswich. So I'm going to say 2-1 Hull. I think they'll go 2-0 up. Norwich will get a goal back and then struggle to really create the chances to get the equaliser. But maybe I'm being too negative, but it just feels like their luck might have run out after some pretty good results, going with some pretty poor performances. What about you, Adam?
Yeah, I think Norwich might get a point, to be honest. I think the fact that Hull have got the level of injuries they've got, and maybe the kind of difficulty you then have with sort of players coming in that haven't been playing for a while and kind of trying to build that chemistry, and that relationship maybe won't be as strong as what maybe Philogene and Delap were building, or you've got Carvalho that's coming in and maybe hasn't quite bedded into the system. So I think there could be a little bit of stodginess maybe from the whole side that might play into Norwich's hands. And as we've seen in recent weeks, they have gone to the likes of Ipswich, who were flying, and picked up a point. So that probably plays into my mind. So I'm going to go for a 1-1. I think that would be a pretty positive result for Norwich, given the circumstances. And then obviously we travel to Bristol midweek with maybe a little bit more optimism. Ollie Baines with a late comment here on Facebook. We've been desperate for a CDM in this side. Reckon Wagner could be tempted to throw Sorensen into that role and play McLean, Nunez and Sarah alongside. Thoughts and feelings on that one, Sam?
That would make sense to me. That would be the sort of thing that I would probably like to see. And I am actually quite a fan of Jakob Sorensen when he's available. He obviously hasn't been fit enough to really make that much of an impact, but I think he's a decent player, and he probably is the closest thing to a true defensive midfielder that Norwich have at the moment. So I wouldn't mind that, to be honest. But, you know, as I said earlier, really, with any defensive midfielder, you either drop McLean or Sarah, or, you know, as Ollie said, Nunez has been doing pretty well as well. So you either drop one of those, or you go with a midfield three and you drop Barnes, and we know how important Barnes has been to Wagner when he's been available. So I think that's a good idea. I would quite like to see that, but I would say based on Wagner's principles and how he's picked the team so far this season, I'd say it's unlikely. Yeah,
you can head over to Tactics Board to hear Sam's full 11 and lots of other great video content across our channels at the moment. Connor spoke to the one and only Michael Turner, of course, formerly of Norwich and Hull. A little interview there, sort of his thoughts and feelings on both clubs and this game particularly, and of course his sort of spells at Carrow Road and the good days, I suppose, at points in the Premier League, and maybe the goal he scored against Aston Villa and playing under Chris Hughton, Grant Holt, Wes Houlihan relationship. Lots of great stuff in that interview. Of course, David Wagner's full press conference, which I'd urge anyone who's not watched it yet to go and take a full watch of. You know, kind of an interesting press conference, lots of interesting comments and body language to maybe pick up on. Of course, I spoke to Ant Northgraves from the Hull and Back podcast, getting the sort of full insight from the whole perspective heading into this one. They're not actually feeling overly confident, which is maybe could go one of either way, really. It might play into Norwich's hands, it might not. And of course, we've got lots of great content across the Pink and Plus as well. You can take a subscription out, $2.99 a month, or there's an annual subscription option as well, a free trial as well, of course, involved in that. So if you don't like it, then you can always leave, and we hope you do like it and continue on our little journey that we're taking with the app. We feel it's a good product for the price, so we'd encourage anyone to head over there. And of course, we'll all be at the MKM tomorrow evening. I think it's going to be a cold one. Need to get the gloves, the hat and the scarf out, I think, up high in the gods that we are in the press box at Hull. And fingers crossed for everyone making that trip, the Norwich can perform and, you know, reward them with something to then bounce into the weekend. You know, a full weekend off the back of a Norwich win is always a good feeling. So we'll see what we get. We'll see you there on tomorrow night. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Enjoy your weekend. Of course, only Thursday, actually. It feels like it's a Friday, so we'd always do these shows on a Friday. But enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you tomorrow night at the MKM.